At 11:47 a.m., on May 29, 1943, at RAF Alconbury, Captain James Hartwell, 26 years old and already the veteran of 42 combat missions, climbed into the cockpit of his modified B-17. His eyes followed the ground crew as they loaded the final, 50 caliber ammunition belt into the aircraft's 17th gun position. He was an experienced B-17 pilot, but what he was about to fly was an entirely new beast. The YB-40 weighed 4,000 pounds more than any flying fortress he had ever handled. That spring, Europe's skies were steeped in mourning. In just 3 months, the 8th Air Force had lost 173 B-17 seconds. Without long-range fighter escort, German Messerschmitt, 109 seconds, and Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds, slaughtered bomber formations on the return leg from deep inside the Reich. Pilots called it the gauntlet. Half of them would never complete 25 missions. The proposed solution sounded madly audacious. If fighters could not escort bombers, then bombers would become fighters. Army Air Force's engineers stripped everything non-essential from the B-17F to make room for weapons. The bombs were removed. The navigator's position was converted into a twin, 50 caliber chin turret. A second dorsal turret was installed aft of the radio room. Single waist guns were replaced with twin mounts. Ammunition was tripled to 11,275 rounds. Additional armor was welded around crew positions. In total, the aircraft carried 16 50 caliber machine guns. They called it the YB-40, the flying destroyer. Hartwell was assigned aircraft 42 to 5,738. The crew named it Hedgehog, but that weight threw everything out of balance. A standard B-17F needed 25 minutes to climb to 20,000 feet. The YB-40 required 48. The controls were brutally heavy. A test pilot at Wright Field had warned Hartwell. The center of gravity was badly compromised by the massive ammunition load stacked behind the bomb bay, yet the firepower Hartwell had never seen anything like it on a bomber. The chin turret alone could tear a Focke-Wulf apart before it even reached firing range. Every approach angle, every attack vector, was covered by overlapping fields of fire from 16 guns. The first mission was straightforward: escort the main formation to Saint-Nazaire to strike the U-boat bases. 7 YB-40 seconds were positioned at the most vulnerable points low and on the outer wings, where German fighters preferred to hunt. At 1:25 p.m., Hartwell started the engines. All 4 Wright Cyclones ran smoothly. They took off at 1:50 p.m., trailing 168 other B-17 seconds. The formation reached the French coast at 3:30. Flak bursts flickered across the sky over Guernsey. Hartwell's flight engineer, Technical Sergeant Paul Morrison, reported higher than expected fuel consumption. The added weight and drag forced the Cyclone engines to work far harder than designed. Saint-Nazaire came into view at 4:02 p.m. The main formation dropped its bombs and turned for home. The now empty B-17FS accelerated and began climbing faster. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward. Hedgehog began to fall behind. Standard B-17 seconds made 160 miles per hour. Even at maximum continuous power, Hedgehog could manage only 148. Morrison checked the number 3 engine gauges and shook his head. The cylinder head temperature was creeping into the red. He eased the throttle back on number 3. Hedgehog's speed dropped to 142 miles per hour. The main formation was now 3 miles ahead, then 4. Hartwell could see 6 other YB-40 seconds struggling at the rear of their own formations, all of them falling behind. Staff Sergeant Frank Delaney, the radio operator in the waist gun position, called out over the intercom. Contrails at 4 o'clock high. German fighters were climbing Focke-Wulf, 190 seconds from Jagdgeschwader 2. 6, maybe 8 of them. They were hunting the stragglers. Hartwell ordered. All gunners lock targets. The first attack came from 5 o'clock. The YB-40 did exactly what it had been designed to do. The tail guns opened fire at 800 yards. The Focke-Wulf broke off and peeled away. The second attack came from 11 o'clock high. 2 FW 190 seconds approached in line astern. The chin turret gunner locked on and fired a 4-second burst. 50 caliber rounds tore into the lead fighter's engine cowling. Black smoke erupted. The aircraft flipped inverted and plunged into the channel. Delaney confirmed the kill. For 6 minutes, the YB-40 seconds firepower worked flawlessly. 3 German fighters made attack runs, and all three were forced to break off early. The overlapping fields of fire from 16 guns created a wall of lead. No German pilot wanted to penetrate, but Hedgehog kept slowing. The main formation was now 6 miles ahead, then 7. Morrison reported the grim numbers. They had burned 800 gallons more fuel than planned during the climb and combat. At the current power setting, they had only 90 minutes left to reach Alconbury. The main formation would land in 70. 2 more Focke-Wulfs appeared at 2 o'clock. This time, they did not disengage. They had discovered the fatal weakness. The YB-40 could not keep up, could not run. They circled patiently, waiting for the straggler to fall farther behind, waiting for the perfect moment to strike from multiple directions. Hartwell pushed the throttles forward again. The number 3 engine temperature climbed back into the red. Morrison watched the needle and said nothing. The escort bomber with 16 guns had become the very target it was meant to protect. The decisive attack came at 4:43 p.m. 3 Focke-Wulfs from 3 directions, high right, low left, and dead ahead, at 12 o'clock level. Hartwell could not evade. The YB-40 turned like a freight train. He held altitude and course. His gunners fired simultaneously. The chin turret locked onto the frontal attacker. The top turret swung right. The ball turret rotated left. Waist gunners fired through opposite windows. Spent casings poured into the fuselage. The aircraft shuddered violently under the combined recoil of 8 guns firing at once. The canopy of the lead Focke-Wulf shattered. It rolled to the right and fell away, trailing smoke. The high attacker broke off early, but the low attacker stayed in and fired a 2-second burst. 20mm cannon shells ripped into Hedgehog's right wing. A hydraulic line was severed. The waist gunner reported fluid spraying across his window. Delaney confirmed it. The right landing gear hydraulic system was gone. If they survived, they would have to hand crank the gear down. Morrison rechecked the fuel. 72 minutes to Alconbury, at the current power setting. The main formation was 8 miles ahead and pulling farther away. They were alone over occupied France. The radio crackled. Another YB-40 crew from the 305th Bomb Group, Captain Richard Hayes, flying aircraft 42 to 5,741. His escort bomber was also falling behind. 2 YB-40 seconds, both struggling to hold speed. Hayes suggested they join up. The combined defensive fire of 32 guns might keep the Germans at bay. Hartwell agreed. Hayes descended from 21,000 feet to match Hedgehog at 19,500. The Focke-Wulfs widened their circles, 4 clearly visible, perhaps 6. They did not attack the 2 escort bombers flying in loose formation, but neither did they leave. At 5:07 p.m., Hartwell crossed the French coast outbound. The channel lay gray and empty beneath them. 53 miles to the English coast. 41 minutes of flight at their current speed. Number 3 engine was overheating. Morrison could no longer hold altitude. Hedgehog began to descend. Hayes called over the radio. His number 2 engine oil pressure was dropping. He throttled back to prevent seizure. His YB-40 slowed to 138 miles per hour. Both aircraft were now flying on the edge, both crews watching their fuel needles creep toward empty. At 5:22 p.m., 2 Messerschmitt Bf 109 seconds suddenly appeared from 6 o'clock high. They had tracked the stragglers all the way out over the channel. The tail gunner, Sergeant Raymond Kack, a former skeet shooting champion, called it out over the intercom. Range, 400 yards and closing. The German fighters dove through 18,000 feet. They opened fire with cannon at 800 yards. Hartwell could not climb, could not accelerate, could not turn sharply enough to throw the attackers out of their sights. The YB-40, burdened by all its excess weight, had become a floating target suspended in empty sky. Kack fired first. He had never tracked targets moving this fast. The lead Me-109 closed to 600 yards. Kack walked his tracer stream across the empty air. The German pilot jinked left, then right, then rolled into a 20-degree dive. His wingman stayed tight behind him. Both German fighters opened fire at 400 yards. Cannon shells tore into Hedgehog's tail. One exploded in the horizontal stabilizer. Another punched through the fuselage, passing just 2 feet from Kack's position. The aircraft shuddered violently. Hartwell felt the controls go mushy. Morrison crawled aft to inspect the damage. The tail control cables were still intact, but the trim tab mechanism had jammed. Hartwell would have to wrestle the control column all the way back to England. The two Messerschmitts pulled up to set up another pass. Hayes YB-40 opened fire with all its upper turrets. The combined fire from the two gunships flooded the sky with tracer streams. The German fighters broke left and climbed back to a safer altitude. At 5:31 p.m., 4 Republic P-47 Thunderbolts appeared from the northeast. They were long-range escort fighters returning from a sweep over Belgium. They had heard the stragglers' distress calls. The P-47 seconds dove toward the Messerschmitts. Seeing them coming, the German pilots turned east, back toward France. The Thunderbolts did not pursue. Instead, they formed up with the two YB-40 seconds and rocked their wings escort to the English coast. Hartwell checked the fuel. 37 minutes remaining at the current power setting, 29 miles to land. They would make it just barely, but Hartwell now saw the truth clearly. The concept had failed. The YB-40 worked perfectly as a gun platform. 16 .50 caliber machine guns could shred any fighter that approached. The chin turret had completely changed the equation for head-on attacks, but the weight had rendered the aircraft useless. After standard B-17 seconds dropped their bombs, they climbed faster and flew faster. The YB-40 still carried 11,000 rounds of ammunition, 4,000 pounds of undroppable guns and ammo, dragged it down, slowed it, turned it into a target rather than a protector. At 5:47 p.m., Hayes called over the radio. His number 2 engine had seized. Oil pressure was 0. He had feathered the propeller. His YB-40 was descending to 15,000 feet on 3 engines. Morrison ran the numbers. Hayes would not make Alconbury. He might not even make England. His fuel consumption on 3 engines was too high. The English coast came into view at 5:53 p.m. Hayes aimed for the first airfield he could find. RAF Manston. Hartwell watched Hayes YB-40 descend, a crippled gunship limping home on 3 engines. At 6:18 p.m., Hedgehog landed at Alconbury. Hartwell had to hand-crank the landing gear down. The right main gear locked into place just 15 seconds before touchdown. Colonel William Reed was waiting on the hardstand. He wanted Hartwell's assessment immediately. This had been the YB-40 seconds first combat test, the flying destroyer, that was supposed to protect the formation. Hartwell shut down the engines and climbed out. His flight suit was soaked with sweat. His hands were still shaking from wrestling the controls for 90 minutes. He looked at Reed and spoke the 3 words that ended the program. It can't keep up. Reed authorized 7 more missions. Perhaps the first test had been an anomaly. Perhaps different tactics would work. But nothing could change the fundamental problem. B-17F, after bomb, release, 48,000 pounds. YB-40, after combat, 64,000 pounds, 4,000 pounds of guns and ammunition that could not be jettisoned. On July 29, the final 2 YB-40 seconds flew their last combat missions. Both fell behind. Both required fighter escort to make it back to England. In August, General Karl Spaatz canceled the program. The Army Air Forces had spent $5.6 million, roughly $90 million in today's dollars, on a weapon system that made bombers more vulnerable, rather than safer. The legacy of failure. Not a single YB-40 survived the war. They were scrapped, converted to trainers, or dismantled. The flying destroyer vanished from history, but the innovation lived on. Engineers at Wright Field studied the combat reports closely. They noticed one crucial fact. Every YB-40 engaged from the front had successfully broken up the attack. The chin turret changed everything to forward firing. 50 caliber guns with a clear field of fire. The Bendix chin turret design was immediately sent to Boeing. It was installed on the B-17 Grams, the final variant and definitive version of the Flying Fortress. Before the chin turret, head-on attacks killed more B-17 seconds than any other method. After the chin turret, losses from frontal attacks dropped by 71%. 2 additional improvements were also inherited. Staggered waist guns, more room for gunners, improving firing arcs by 40%. Cheyenne tail, a redesigned tail gun position, offering better visibility and protection. Hartwell returned to Alconbury in December 1943 as a training officer. Just as the first B-17 GS arrived, he watched new crews walk around the bombers, pointing at the chin turret, asking how it worked. Hartwell told them about the YB-40, the gunship that couldn't keep up, the 3-month program that had failed spectacularly. One pilot asked Hartwell whether the YB-40 had been worth it. Worth the money, the effort, the crews who flew those aircraft into combat. Hartwell looked at the B-17 Grams, its chin turret glinting under England's pale winter sun. He thought of the 8,680 B-17 GS that would carry that turret before the war ended. He thought of the 2,300 crews who would make it home because of that protection. He answered, worth it. Every mission, every dollar, every bullet hole in Hedgehog's fuselage. The YB-40 taught us how to fail forward. History remembers successes, the B-17 Grams that helped win the war. History forgets failures, the YB-40 that couldn't keep up, the $5.6 million mistake. But the lesson remains. The spectacular failure of 12 aircraft produced an innovation that saved thousands of lives. The flying destroyer died, but it left behind a legacy of protection.